The snow fell in heavy sheets that night, swallowing the land in silence and white. It was the kind of storm that could bury roads, crush weak roofs, and smother a man's will to live. Out there, beneath a bent and dying pine tree, 3 children huddled together. Their bodies trembled, not only from the cold but from hunger and fear. Their breaths rose in shallow puffs, vanishing quickly into the storm as though even the air itself was unwilling to linger. The oldest, Thomas, tried to be brave. At 12 years old, he knew the responsibility of keeping his sisters safe had fallen squarely on his thin shoulders. He wrapped his arm tightly around Eliza, who was 10, and around little Mary, who was barely 3 and barely conscious. Their clothes were threadbare, torn and soaked, their shoes crusted with frozen mud. The warmth of their parents had been gone for months, and so had the sound of their laughter. The world, it seemed, had turned its back on them. Thomas whispered, trying to sound strong, "We'll make it through. I promise." But the words shook as they left his mouth, betrayed by the bite of winter and the heaviness in his heart. Eliza buried her face into his arm, silent tears trailing down her cheeks before freezing in place. Mary whimpered weakly, her small hand barely clutching the edge of her brother's shirt. Then came the sound that changed everything. A deep, rhythmic pounding, muffled at first, but growing louder. Footsteps, heavy enough to make the snow tremble. Thomas lifted his head, fear flooding his chest. Through the blur of white, a figure was coming. Tall, wide, a man whose shadow seemed to bend against the storm itself. The children froze, unsure if they were staring at a savior or a phantom conjured from the blizzard. The figure grew clearer with each step. A cowboy. His coat was long, black, and frayed at the edges, whipping in the wind like a flag of defiance. His hat, wide-brimmed and dusted with frost, cast his face in half-shadow. He moved with the confidence of a man who feared nothing, neither the snow, nor the dark, nor the ghosts of the past that the children imagined might haunt nights like this. When he stopped before them, the storm seemed to pause, as though waiting to hear what he would say. He crouched, his massive frame folding down with surprising gentleness. His gloved hand extended, palm open. His voice rumbled low, like distant thunder rolling across the plains. "You ain't alone no more. From this moment on, you can call me father." The words didn't make sense at first. They sounded too big, too impossible. Eliza clutched Thomas tighter, her eyes wide and suspicious. Thomas wanted to speak, to ask who this man was and why he had found them. But before he could, little Mary reached out with her tiny hand. Her fingers, weak and trembling, touched the stranger's glove. He didn't pull away. Instead, he lifted her easily, as though she weighed no more than a feather. He pressed her against his chest, and for the first time in days, Mary sighed in relief. The warmth radiating from him was undeniable. It wasn't just the warmth of his body, but something deeper, like the fire of a hearth long missed, or the safety of a home that no longer existed. From that night forward, their lives would never be the same. The cowboy took them under his wing, and the whispers of the nearby towns soon gave him a name, the Giant of the Plains. Some said he was no ordinary man, that the land itself had shaped him, that storms bent around him, that wolves dared not cross his path. To the children, none of that mattered. What mattered was that he kept them alive, and more than that, he gave them something they thought they had lost forever, belonging. Days turned into weeks as he led them through endless stretches of snow. He taught Thomas how to build a fire even when the wood was wet and brittle. He showed Eliza how to cook beans and meat over the flames, making meals that filled their bellies and warmed their bones. And he made Mary laugh, lifting her onto his shoulders, letting her small hands clutch his hat as they trudged across the white wasteland. At night, when the stars came out and the wolves howled in the distance, the children no longer trembled. For the cowboy sat with his rifle across his lap, eyes sharp and steady, daring any danger to come near. More than once, they saw shapes moving in the shadows, eyes glinting like coals, footsteps crunching in the snow, but none dared cross the invisible boundary around their camp. The giant cowboy's presence was enough to keep even the wild at bay. But it wasn't just protection he gave them. He gave them purpose. Thomas, once weighed down by grief, began to carry himself differently, standing straighter, speaking with a voice that no longer wavered. Eliza, who had once kept silent, began to hum softly by the fire, her voice carrying a strange kind of hope. And Mary, who had nearly wasted away, bloomed with life. Her laughter became the music of their camp, and even the cowboy's stern face softened when she giggled. There were tests, of course. One night, a band of outlaws came upon their camp. They had heard rumors of a giant man traveling with 3 orphans, and they saw weakness where there was none. The cowboy didn't flinch when they stepped out of the dark, guns glinting under the moonlight. He told the children to stay behind the fire. Then he rose to his full height. Against the flames, his shadow stretched impossibly tall. The fight was over before it began. He disarmed one with a single strike, sent another sprawling into the snow, and with nothing more than his presence, scattered the rest into the night. The children watched, their hearts pounding, realizing fully for the first time that this man was more than just a protector. He was a force of nature. As time passed, they grew into a family. The cowboy never spoke of his past, never explained where he had come from, but it didn't matter. His silence was steady, and his actions louder than words. He was there when Eliza learned to braid Mary's hair. He was there when Thomas first shot a rifle, the bullet ringing true under his steady hand. He was there when Mary, still small, declared proudly that they weren't orphans anymore, because they had a father. Years slipped by like snow melting in spring. The children grew taller, stronger, no longer fragile shadows of who they had been. And the cowboy aged too, though his strength remained. His beard grew gray, his eyes more lined with wisdom than with weariness. Together, they crossed plains, mountains, and towns, leaving behind stories that others whispered but never fully understood. One winter, many years later, they returned to that same bent pine tree, now old and bare against the frozen ground. Thomas, now a young man with broad shoulders, stood beside Eliza, her hair braided neatly, her eyes clear with determination. Mary, no longer the frail toddler, but a girl with bright laughter still in her voice, leaned against the cowboy's side. They looked back at where it had all begun. Where they had nearly been lost to the snow, and where one man's choice had changed everything. The cowboy rested his hand on Thomas's shoulder, and for the first time, spoke words that would stay with them forever. "Family," he said, "ain't always blood. Sometimes it's the ones you'd give your life for." And in that moment, with snow falling gently around them, they understood. They weren't orphans anymore. They never had been, not since the day the giant cowboy said, "Call me Father."